I can fix it. A poor single mom heard a mafia boss's cry for help. Then she taught him what he couldn't. The Ferrari screamed, smoke pouring from its heart, and the mafia boss cursed. Then a child's voice cut through the chaos. My mommy can fix it. The woman who stepped forward wasn't supposed to survive his world, but in 2 minutes, she'd make it kneel. Before we begin, please take a moment to support this channel by clicking the like, share, and subscribe button so you can keep enjoying awesome stories like this. Thank you. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A little girl with wild curls clutched a one-eared teddy bear. Beside her stood Loretta Gomez, hands streaked with grease, eyes steady despite the wall of suited bodyguards. If I'm wrong, you lose nothing, she said evenly. If I'm right, you're about to melt a 100,000 euro battery core. Tommaso's stare hardened. No one challenged him, certainly not a woman in a faded blue dress with a child on her hip. But the diagnostic screen behind her flickered thermal sealant failure, confirmed. The street fell silent. Loretta knelt beside the Ferrari's rear intake, the heat distorting the air around her. Give me 2 minutes, she murmured. Tommaso's jaw flexed. Against every instinct bred by years of command, he nodded once. What hidden knowledge did this stranger carry? How could a woman the world ignored speak with the certainty of his own engineers? And why did her child look at him? Not with fear, but pity. In the next 60 seconds, the man who ruled empires of silence would learn what real power sounded like. If you believe respect shouldn't depend on money or fear, tap subscribe right now, because only the cruel still think power makes them right. Loretta hadn't always been invisible. Before the layoffs, before the explosion at Rosso Dynamics, she'd been one of the youngest mechanical designers on the hybrid systems floor, the same company the Mafia secretly bankrolled. Now she worked nights fixing mopeds behind her apartment in Cordo Aggiaro, every euro stretched thin, every morning spent convincing 5-year-old Tatiana that tomorrow would be kinder. She hadn't planned to stop today, not for a man like Becerra. But when the smoke rose and the crowd only watched, something in her refused to stay silent. The same instinct that once built engines whispered, I can fix it. Now, as the cameras zoomed in and the Ferrari's temperature gauge climbed, Loretta reached for the teddy bear's ribbon. The mafia boss watched, torn between fury and fascination. And somewhere deep under the roar of the city, both of their lives began to turn. The crowd pressed closer, their phones raised like metallic fireflies, capturing every second of a moment no one could believe was real. Loretta's fingers brushed the Ferrari's carbon fiber panel, feeling the subtle vibration beneath. The engine wasn't dead, it was choking. She leaned closer, listening, her ear inches from a machine worth more than the building she lived in. The heat shimmered against her cheek. The sound's off by half a note, she murmured, mostly to herself. Coolant loop's failing. Tommaso frowned. What did you say? She looked up, meeting his eyes without fear. It's the nanothermal valve. It's not sealing. You're bleeding charge into the hybrid array. His expression froze, as if she'd just spoken a secret she shouldn't know. Around him, his men exchanged looks, confused, suspicious. Only Ferrari's prototype engineers used that term. Even his own driver, a man who'd been around engines his entire life, wouldn't have understood it. How the hell would you know that? He demanded. Loretta didn't flinch. Because the coolant's leaving streaks under the left intake, blue-gray tint, not white. That means the ion regulator's running dry. The next minute decides if you're driving home or calling a tow. Her voice carried calm authority, the kind that didn't come from guessing. It came from years spent inside machines, listening until they spoke back. Tommaso's guard stepped forward instantly. One of them, a tall brute named Rocco, snapped. Boss, she's casing the car. Probably planted something. She's got a kid with her, another muttered. That's what makes it perfect, Rocco shot back. Loretta didn't move. If I were lying, she said evenly, the onboard diagnostics would prove it. Why don't you check? Tommaso's glare flicked toward the digital display on the Ferrari's interior console. The engine status pulsed red. Warning, thermal sealant failure, hybrid loop compromised. For a brief, electric moment, no one spoke. The air itself seemed to pause. Tommaso's throat tightened. She was right. Exactly right. The crowd began to whisper. Who is she? She just called the problem before the system did. Did you hear what she said? Nanothermal something? Sounds like she built the damn car. Rocco's jaw clenched. He didn't like what this looked like. His boss standing frozen while a poor woman in a cheap dress outsmarted a €1,000,000 machine. Loretta straightened up, wiping a streak of oil across her wrist. "You have 3 minutes before that coolant hits critical loss," she said. "You'll smell burning ozone. After that, forget your battery array, your car's done." She turned to her daughter. "Tatiana, give mommy the little ribbon." The child obediently untied the red ribbon from her teddy bear's neck. Loretta looped it around her wrist, as if already thinking 3 steps ahead. Tommaso's mind raced. Who was she? 8 years earlier. The smell of burning metal filled the air long before the alarm screamed. Loretta remembered that day like it was etched into her bones. Rosso Dynamics Automotive. Naples. The factory hummed with a low symphony of machines, each one building a piece of perfection, hybrid engines designed for the elite. She'd worked there since she was 23, one of the few women in the diagnostics division. Her husband, Carlos Gomez, worked on the pressure seals. Then came the explosion. A flash, a roar, and the ceiling rained fire. She remembered running toward the sound, the panic, the heat, the way the world split in two, the part where she had a husband and the part after she didn't. They called it a systems error. She called it what it was, neglect. The reports buried the truth. Faulty parts approved by men who wanted bonuses more than safety. And the name on those approval papers, the name on the ownership line, was Tommaso Becerra. The memory faded as quickly as it came. Now, standing before the man himself, Loretta's pulse stayed steady. He didn't recognize her. Men like him rarely looked at the people they hurt long enough to remember their faces. "I've seen this kind of valve failure before," she said. "Back when the prototypes were still burning out under high load." Tommaso's eyes sharpened. "You've seen it before?" "I used to work at Rosso Dynamics," she replied quietly, "on the hybrid cooling line." He took half a step back, his mind connecting the name to a file buried years ago. Rosso Dynamics, explosion, 3 dead workers. Loretta continued, her tone still calm. "Before your company changed hands." "My company?" Her gaze flicked toward the license plate of the Ferrari, the same insignia used by the parent company's logistics fleet. "You didn't know? Rosso was one of your subsidiaries before you sold it. After the accident." He stared at her. For the first time in years, Tommaso Becerra, the man who'd stared down gun barrels and government prosecutors, felt something he couldn't control. Guilt. The tension around the car thickened. Rocco stepped in front of Loretta, hand on his weapon. "Enough. Boss, she's fishing for something." "Fishing," Loretta said, raising an eyebrow. "If I wanted something, I'd have charged you for saving your engine." "You watch your mouth," Rocco snapped. Tatiana whimpered softly. Loretta placed a steady hand on her daughter's shoulder. "It's all right, honey. They're just afraid of people who know what they're talking about." That hit harder than a slap. Tommaso shot his lieutenant a glare that silenced him. Then he turned back to her. "You said you worked there. What happened?" Her eyes flickered, grief hiding behind composure. "You know what happened." He didn't respond. He couldn't. A ripple went through the onlookers as the Ferrari's temperature warning blinked critical. Loretta exhaled slowly. "You're losing time." Then, without waiting for permission, she crouched beside the car again, opening the small utility pouch hanging from her shoulder. Inside were scraps of tape, an old screwdriver, and a pin spring she'd salvaged days ago. Tatiana crouched beside her, watching. "You really think she can fix it?" someone in the crowd whispered. "She already did once." "She's crazy. She's a genius." Loretta's fingers moved with confident precision. "The sealant tubes ruptured," she said. "If I block the leak, the cooling loop can rebalance long enough for you to get to a proper bay." Tommaso crouched beside her, ignoring the cameras, ignoring his men's stunned looks. "You can really fix this?" She didn't glance up. "I don't guess." Rocco leaned toward the other guards, muttering, "You really think we should let her touch that car? What if she's got some setup?" The others hesitated. But before anyone could speak, the Ferrari's onboard diagnostics chimed softly. Pressure regaining. System stabilizing. Every head turned toward the display. The readings climbed from red to amber, then green. A cheer broke through the crowd like a wave. Phones flashed. Someone shouted, "She did it!" Rocco's jaw dropped. "Madonna." Tommaso stared at the dashboard, then at the woman still crouched beside his car. For the first time in years, his pride wavered. He'd spent his life commanding fear, and yet, somehow, this woman had commanded his respect. He opened his mouth, but Loretta beat him to it. "Don't thank me yet," she said quietly. "You've still got a lot more broken than this engine." Comment: I stand for justice. If you'd never side with people who crush others to protect their power. The crowd began to disperse, murmuring about the miracle mechanic. Reporters hovered at a distance, already tweeting, already speculating. Tommaso stood motionless, watching as Loretta tied the red ribbon back around the teddy bear's neck. He'd faced rival dons, traitors, and assassins. None of them had ever made him feel this exposed. And as the sun dipped lower over Milan, Tommaso Buscetta realized something he'd never admit out loud. His empire was built on control. But this woman, she'd just made him lose it. The street had gone eerily quiet, so quiet that the clicking of Loretta's old screwdriver against metal sounded louder than the idling engines of the traffic blocked behind them. The Ferrari's hybrid core pulsed like a dying heart, its internal fans stuttering. The air shimmered with heat and danger. Loretta didn't flinch. She opened her little pouch wider, her tools so meager they looked almost laughable next to the red, gleaming monster before her. But her hands moved with the certainty of someone who'd been here before, at the brink, with seconds between failure and salvation. "Tatiana," she said softly. The girl was already at her side, clutching her teddy bear tight. "Mommy, give me his ear." Tatiana's eyes widened. "But that's—" "I know, sweetie." Loretta smiled, though her voice trembled just slightly. "He'll get a new one later. Right now, we need his ribbon and that ear." Tatiana hesitated for only a moment, then nodded bravely and tore the soft brown ear from the bear's head. She handed it to her mother like an offering. The child's lip quivered, but her chin stayed up. Loretta took the ear, the ribbon, a spring from her pen, and a strip of tape from her pouch. "Good girl," she whispered. Tommaso watched, arms folded tight across his chest. He'd seen men dismantle explosives, rebuild engines mid-race, even perform emergency surgery under fire. None of it compared to the quiet intensity of what this woman was doing. Rocco muttered beside him, "Boss, this is madness. That car's got over 800 volts running through it. If she slips." "She won't," Tommaso interrupted, his voice low, eyes locked on Loretta's trembling hands. She worked like a surgeon, improvising, adjusting, listening to the faint hiss of pressurized fluid. With the pen spring, she fashioned a makeshift tension coil. The ribbon became a brace to hold it in place, and the teddy bear's ear, a soft, porous patch, was pressed against the leak, sealing it with gentle pressure. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear, she was running on adrenaline, but from the unbearable awareness of the hundreds of eyes watching. Behind her, Tatiana crouched low, whispering a small prayer she'd heard her mother say when nights got too cold. "Please let mommy fix it." The smell of coolant mixed with perfume from bystanders and the distant aroma of roasted coffee from a cafe half a block away. The world, for a brief second, felt suspended between heaven and asphalt. Tommaso's phone buzzed in his pocket. Reporters, associates, investors, all watching the viral stream that was surely spreading across the internet by now. The Mafia boss and the mechanic mother. It sounded like a cruel headline. He ignored it. Then Loretta spoke without looking up. "Hold this." He blinked. "What?" "The clamp." She extended the screwdriver toward him. His men froze. No one had ever told him what to do. Not like that. But he took the tool anyway. For a long, breathless second, the infamous Tommaso Buscetta crouched beside a poor woman in the middle of Milan, his €1,000 suit brushing against the asphalt. His silk tie swung forward, the emblem of his status now flecked with grease. "Here," he asked. "A little higher." Their hands almost touched as the spring clicked into place. The temperature gauge on the Ferrari's console flickered from crimson to amber. Loretta's fingers were slick with oil and sweat. She reached for her sleeve, but Tommaso's hand moved faster. He pulled a white silk handkerchief from his pocket, the kind that cost more than her week's rent, and held it out. "For your hands," he said. She hesitated. "That's... just take it." She did. The gesture shouldn't have meant anything, but it did. It wasn't just a handkerchief. It was a fracture in the wall between their worlds. Her hand steadied. Her voice did not shake. "The coolant stabilized," she said. "I just need to reroute pressure from the backup regulator." "How?" Tommaso asked, watching her every move. "Like this." She flicked the switch beside the intake port, adjusted the ribbon's tension, then tapped the metal casing twice. The sound shifted, smooth, rhythmic, alive. A hum replaced the hiss. Then, with a sharp click, the engine monitor blinked green. System rebalanced. Hybrid loop stable. Loretta stood slowly, wiping her hands on the silk handkerchief now smudged with oil and sweat. "There," she said, almost under her breath. "Your car's alive again." For a moment, no one moved. Then the roar came, soft at first, then growing, like a sleeping beast awakening. The Ferrari's turbine spun up, the engine purring like a heartbeat rediscovered. Gasps filled the air. "She did it," someone shouted. Phone shot higher. People cheered, clapped, whistled. A few even screamed her name, though no one knew it yet. In the middle of it all stood Tommaso Buscetta, the man who ruled empires through fear, watching a woman fix what his engineers, his money, and his power couldn't. The crowd's applause wasn't just for her. It was for what she represented. A poor single mother had done the impossible. Rocco muttered under his breath, "Boss, cameras are everywhere. This looks bad." Tommaso didn't answer. He couldn't look away. He watched the ribbon flutter in the breeze, holding the repair steady. The teddy bear's ear, half melted, clung to the valve like a badge of courage. A child's toy had saved a king's machine. That irony hit him harder than he expected. The journalists began shouting questions. "Senior Buscetta? Who is she? Is she part of your team? Are you hiring her?" Loretta turned toward him. For the first time, she smiled faintly, exhausted but proud. "You can take it from here," she said. He didn't smile back. Couldn't. The weight in his chest was too strange, too unfamiliar. Gratitude and confusion tangled with something darker, recognition. He cleared his throat, trying to reclaim some semblance of control. "What's your name?" "Loretta." She bent to pick up the teddy bear, now missing an ear and smudged with grease. She handed it to Tatiana, who looked up at her mother like she was watching magic. Tommaso's men stepped closer, shielding him from the crowd. "Boss, we should go," one of them urged. But he didn't move. He couldn't. His gaze stayed on the woman tightening the last piece of tape, as though sealing not just a leak, but his fate. Only the proud refuse to learn. Tap subscribe if you believe humility is real power. The Ferrari idled steadily, humming like a heartbeat restored. Loretta exhaled, brushing her hair from her face. She looked up, and for the first time, Tommaso wasn't looking at her like a problem. He looked at her like a question. Finally, he spoke. His voice was quieter than the engine now. "Who are you?" Loretta met his gaze, the city's golden light reflecting in her eyes. "Someone who listens," she said. And as the crowd erupted once more around them, Tommaso Buscetta, il fantasma di Napoli, stood in silence, realizing that in front of all of Milan, a poor single mother had just taught him his first real lesson in humility. The Ferrari purred as it moved through the streets of Milan that night, but Tommaso Buscetta didn't hear it. The roar that once defined his pride now sounded hollow, like a confession whispered into a cathedral that no one answered. Loretta's words lingered louder than the engine. "You've still got a lot more broken than this engine." Every mile from Porta Nuova to his villa felt longer than it should have. The city lights blurred through the tinted glass, gold and red streaks smearing across his reflection. He saw not a dawn, not il fantasma di Napoli, but a man haunted. The name Gomez kept echoing in his head like a ghost he couldn't place. By dawn, the villa on Lake Como was silent except for the steady tick of an antique clock. Tommaso sat by the window in his robe, untouched espresso cooling beside him. He'd barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, Loretta, her calm defiance, her oil-streaked hands, the child's steady gaze. And then the name resurfaced. Gomez. He opened his laptop and typed it into an encrypted database that only he and two lawyers could access, Rosso Dynamics. The old files took a moment to load. He hadn't looked at them in years. When the screen finally flickered to life, he scrolled past the glossy reports, the ones that sold the world on innovation and progress, until he reached the buried folder marked 2018 Incident Reports, Napoli Facility. He clicked. A single document filled the screen. Explosion at Unit 3, Hybrid Cooling Development. The cause, pressure valve failure. Casualties, 3 confirmed dead. Names, Rinaldi, Ferrante, Gomez. His chest tightened. Carlos Gomez. The surname that had clung to him like smoke since yesterday. Loretta's husband. Naples, 2018. The air had smelled of ozone and burning metal that morning. Tommaso remembered stepping off the helicopter, the factory sirens wailing in the distance. He'd only been there because the press wouldn't stop circling the story. 3 workers dead in Rosso Dynamics explosion, safety concerns ignored. He'd walked through the blackened ruins of the assembly bay, his shoes crunching over shards of glass. Everything smelled like death and chemicals. A man in a gray suit, one of his legal fixers, handed him a file. "We've arranged compensation for the families, Senior Becerra. If they sign, the report stays internal. The press will never see it." He remembered the faces of the widows. He'd looked at them just long enough to hand over the envelopes. One woman hadn't taken hers. A young woman with tear-streaked cheeks and oil still under her fingernails. She'd stared at him with hatred sharp enough to pierce armor. "You call this justice?" she'd said, voice trembling. "You can't buy silence forever." He hadn't even known her name then. Now he did. Loretta Gomez. Tommaso closed the laptop slowly, his reflection staring back in the dark screen. His temples ached. The villa felt suffocatingly quiet. He poured himself a drink, scotch, neat, and sat in the leather armchair that had held the weight of too many late-night deals. Outside, the lake was a sheet of steel. Birds glided over the surface, cutting perfect lines through the reflection of the rising sun. He envied their simplicity. Every life he'd taken or ruined in business or in blood had followed the same pattern: profit, silence, forget. But Loretta had cracked something open in him that refused to close. She hadn't begged. She hadn't cursed. She'd simply fixed what he'd broken and then walked away. That was power he couldn't command. The knock came mid-morning. Rocco Valli entered, crisp as always, his tailored jacket barely creasing. He looked more like a banker than the man who'd once buried rivals under construction sites. "Boss," he said, stopping at the doorway. "The videos from yesterday went viral. You're trending." Tommaso didn't look up. Trending. They're calling her the mechanic angel. Half the city thinks she's a miracle worker. The other half thinks she's a setup. Some even say she's working for the Russians. Idiots. Rocco smirked faintly. "Maybe. But we can spin this. Say she's part of the family, a sponsor from the foundation." "No." Tommaso interrupted. "Leave her out of it." Rocco blinked. "Boss, that's not. She's not leverage. She's not business. Drop it." The silence stretched between them, heavy and unfamiliar. Finally, Rocco asked, "Why?" "She embarrassed you in public. You looked weak." Tommaso's gaze drifted back to the lake. "She wasn't wrong." Rocco frowned. "You're serious." "Find her." Rocco's jaw tightened. "For what? You want her gone? Say the word." "I'll." "Not gone." Tommaso snapped, the word cutting through the air like a blade. "I want to talk to her." Rocco took a slow step closer. "Boss, with respect, mercy looks like weakness. The commission's already watching. You start showing softness now, people will smell blood." Tommaso turned his head just enough for Rocco to see the steel in his eyes. "Then let them think I'm weak." Rocco blinked, taken aback. "That's not the Tommaso I know." "Maybe that's the problem," Tommaso murmured. He rose and walked toward the large painting on the far wall, a portrait of a Sicilian vineyard, his father's land, long lost to bank seizures decades ago. He traced the frame absently. His father had believed that wealth could wash away shame. Tommaso had spent his entire life proving him right. Until yesterday. Now he wasn't so sure. He turned back to Rocco. Discreetly. "No threats. No gifts. Just find her address." Rocco hesitated, jaw clenched. "You got it, boss." As he left, Tommaso called out, "Rocco." "Yeah. When you find her, don't follow her. Just watch. Tell me where she teaches. Who she talks to. That's all." Rocco nodded once, though his eyes held unease. Understood. When he was gone, Tommaso sank back into his chair. He poured another glass of scotch, but didn't drink it. His phone buzzed with messages from Dubai, deal updates, transfers, meetings. The empire still moved like clockwork, but it all felt distant, meaningless. The sound of the explosion from 2018 echoed in his memory. The screaming, the chaos, the smell of molten wire. Loretta's husband had died because men like him had cut corners. He'd signed the silencing payout that same night. Money had always been his answer to everything. But Loretta hadn't taken his money then, and she wouldn't take it now. He looked at the Ferrari parked outside through the open blinds. The car gleamed flawless, a perfect mask. But he knew. Inside that machine, Under the shining panels, there was still a ribbon, a spring, and a piece of a child's toy holding it together. It wasn't perfection anymore. It was patched, fragile, human, just like him. He picked up his phone. "Rocco," he said when the line connected. "Boss, when you find her, tell me first. I'll handle this one myself." Rocco hesitated, then said quietly, "You sure that's wise?" Tommaso's voice dropped low. "No, but it's necessary." He hung up and stared out the window, the morning light painting the lake in gold. For the first time in years, he didn't know what came next. But he knew one thing for certain. He had to see her again. Not as a boss. Not as a criminal. As a man trying to fix something far more broken than a car. Like this story, if you think greed and silence are the real killers. Cowards defend corruption, not justice. The underpass beneath the Navigli Canal smelled of rust and rain. Sunlight slanted through the cracks above, falling in stripes across a scatter of scrap metal and half-assembled engines. The graffiti-covered concrete echoed with the laughter of half a dozen teenagers, their hands stained with grease, their faces lit by curiosity. Loretta crouched beside an old scooter engine balanced on a crate. "Now, tell me again, why didn't the ignition catch?" A boy with a mop of curls frowned in concentration. Because the ground wire's too corroded?" Loretta smiled. "Exactly. You can't start anything if your foundation's broken." The kids nodded like she'd just handed them a secret. In her voice, they heard patience. In her eyes, they saw what they'd been denied everywhere else, belief. Tatiana sat on a nearby blanket with her one-eared teddy bear, humming while she colored on cardboard with a dull pencil. Every few minutes, she'd look up proudly at her mother, watching her teach, watching her fix. Loretta had turned this corner of forgotten city into a small kingdom of purpose. No pay, no grants, just hope and old tools. To anyone else, it was nothing. To her, it was everything. The sound of distant engines broke the calm. At first, Loretta didn't look up. Navigli was full of traffic and restless noise. But this sound wasn't the city's rhythm. It was too synchronized, too heavy. Four black SUVs rolled into view, tires crunching gravel. The laughter vanished. The teens froze. Loretta stood slowly, her instincts tightening. She recognized the formation, two in front, two behind, like a moving fortress. Doors opened in unison, and men in suits stepped out, their movements sharp and practiced. Tatiana dropped her pencil. "Mommy." Loretta crouched, brushed a curl from her daughter's face, and whispered, "Stay behind me." The teenagers scattered, one by one, fear dissolving their earlier bravery. Within seconds, it was just Loretta, Tatiana, and the men in black. Rocco Valley led the formation, his sunglasses reflecting the sunlight like a mirror of intimidation. "Loretta Gomez," he called out. His tone wasn't a question, it was a verdict. Loretta straightened. "You didn't need 4 cars for a mother and a child." Rocco smirked. "The boss wanted to make sure you were safe. Your kind of safe usually ends with someone missing." He didn't respond. His eyes flicked toward Tatiana. "Cute kid." Loretta's voice sharpened. "Don't." The air grew taut. Then, the back door of the lead SUV opened. Tommaso Becerra stepped out, not in his usual armor of tailored intimidation, but in a dark overcoat and open collar. He wasn't surrounded by gold or arrogance this time. In his hand, he carried a briefcase. The men stiffened as he waved them back. "Stay by the cars." "Boss." He didn't repeat himself. They obeyed. Tommaso walked forward slowly, the sound of his shoes echoing against the underpass walls. Loretta didn't move. "You didn't have to send an army," she said. He stopped a few steps away. They insisted. Of course they did. For a moment, neither spoke. Only the faint trickle of canal water filled the silence. Tommaso's gaze drifted over the setup, the crates, the old parts, the kids' discarded notebooks. "You're teaching them." "I'm showing them how to listen," she corrected. "Engines talk. The world just never teaches people like us how to hear it." He nodded, unsure why that hit him harder than he expected. Then he lifted the briefcase and set it down on a table of warped plywood. "There's 100,000 euros inside." Loretta didn't even glance at it. "For what?" she asked. "For the accident. For your husband." His voice lowered. "For my mistake." Her hands tightened at her sides. "You think you can pay for what happened?" "I can't bring him back," he said quietly. "But I can make things easier. For you. For her." Tatiana peeked out from behind her mother, clutching the teddy bear close. Loretta exhaled slowly. Easier isn't the same as right. I know. Then why offer it? He hesitated. Because guilt doesn't disappear. It just waits for a moment like this to collect. Loretta's gaze hardened. Money's what broke this world. Men like you threw numbers at grief until you forgot the faces. He winced. She stepped closer, voice low but fierce. You want to fix something? Fix the system that let this happen. Fix the factories where men die because safety costs too much. Fix the streets where my students will end up because the world doesn't see their worth. She pointed at the briefcase. But don't insult us with hush money. Not again. Tommaso didn't move. Didn't speak. The words carved through his silence like glass. Finally, he nodded once, picked up the briefcase, and set it back by his feet. He had faced prosecutors, rival dons, and killers without blinking. But standing before this woman, he felt smaller than he had since he was a boy. Rocco shifted uneasily by the cars, watching from afar. Boss, we should go, he called. Tommaso raised a hand, silencing him without looking. He turned back to Loretta. You teach kids down here? When I can. When the city ignores us long enough to let us breathe. He looked around again. The cracked walls, the improvised workbenches, the mix of laughter and desperation clinging to the air. It wasn't charity. It was defiance. He gestured toward the engines. You ever think of doing this somewhere better? A real place. Better doesn't need marble floors, she replied. It needs people who care. Something in her tone, unbending, proud, stirred the faintest smile at the corner of his mouth. You're not afraid of me, he said. No, she answered. You bleed like everyone else. He almost laughed, but it came out as a breath instead. She turned away and crouched beside Tatiana, brushing dust off her jacket. Come on, sweetie. Let's pack up. Lesson's over. Tatiana looked up at him curiously. Are you a bad man? Tommaso froze. Loretta's voice softened. He's trying not to be. The child nodded, accepting that answer more easily than he could. Tommaso stood there for another long moment, the echo of her words circling his chest like a ghost he couldn't shake. You can't pay for what's gone, she'd said. Fix the world that broke it. He didn't know how, but he wanted to try. He stepped back, signaling to his men. The SUVs came alive again, engines rumbling like thunder in a storm. As he turned to leave, Loretta's voice stopped him once more. Tommaso, she said. He faced her. If you really mean to fix something, don't start with me. He nodded once, a silent promise he wasn't sure how to keep. Then he got into the car, the briefcase untouched beside him. Through the window, he saw her again. Loretta surrounded by pieces of broken machines, a mother and teacher in the ruins of forgotten dreams. For the first time in years, Tommaso Becerra truly looked at someone, and saw not a threat, not a transaction, but truth. And that terrified him more than any bullet ever had. The invitation came folded inside a plain white envelope with no return address. Just a single line, typed neatly. An opportunity worth hearing. Lake Como. Noon. Loretta turned it over in her hands as though expecting it to bite. The signature at the bottom was a name she now knew too well, Tommaso Becerra. She almost tore it up, but curiosity, or maybe unfinished anger, kept her from doing so. That night, while Tatiana slept, Loretta sat at the kitchen table staring at the letter, a chipped mug of coffee going cold beside her. She told herself she was going to refuse, that she didn't know him a single word more. But the truth was, she wanted to see why. Why a man like him couldn't just leave her alone. By morning, she'd decided to go. Not for him, but for closure. The villa at Lake Como rose like a ghost out of the mist. She'd seen places like it before, on the front pages of magazines she used to read at bus stops. The kind of homes where people spoke softly because the walls themselves seemed to cost more than her entire neighborhood. A man in a dark suit opened the gate without a word. His eyes followed her, but he didn't speak. Loretta's car, a dented blue Fiat, looked painfully out of place among the gleaming collection of machines parked along the drive. She felt her pulse quicken as she climbed the marble steps. Her boots left faint, oily marks on the pristine white stone. When the door opened, Tommaso Becerra stood there, not in his immaculate tailored armor this time, but in a simple charcoal sweater. No jewelry, no bodyguards hovering close. Just him. Loretta, he said quietly. Thank you for coming. Let's skip the gratitude, she replied. Why am I here? He gestured toward the study. Please. The room smelled faintly of oak and scotch. Sunlight from the lake spilled across the polished desk where a file lay open. She didn't need to see the cover to know what it was. Rosso Dynamics Automotive, 2018 Incident Report. Her throat tightened. He motioned toward it. You recognize this? I lived it, she said. He nodded. Then you know what's inside. I know what was missing, she replied, her voice sharper than she intended. The truth. Tommaso sat down behind the desk, but didn't reach for the file. His expression was unreadable, though his hands betrayed him. Fingers twitching slightly, the only sign of nerves. For years, he began, I told myself it was just business. That accidents happen. That what mattered was keeping the company alive. But when I saw you under that bridge, he stopped, searching for words. I realized it wasn't business. It was cowardice. Loretta said nothing. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears. He finally met her gaze. I signed the papers that buried your truth. Your husband's name. The real cause of that explosion. Her breath caught. The admission was simple, but it hit like an earthquake. She'd imagined hearing those words for years. She'd dreamed of shouting, of throwing something, of watching a man like him break. But standing there, she felt none of that. Only a hollow ache. She took a step forward, her voice low. You silenced us. You took my husband's death and turned it into a footnote. I know. You didn't even come to the funeral. He closed his eyes briefly. I couldn't face you. Or you didn't care. He looked up sharply, shame flickering through his eyes. I cared. That's what made it worse. The words hung in the air between them, raw, unvarnished. For a long while, the only sound was the slow, rhythmic ticking of a clock on the wall. Loretta stared at the file. The edges were worn, as if he'd read it too many times. On the first page, a photo of the wrecked plant. Crushed steel, smoke still rising. Her husband's name circled in red ink. Her vision blurred. She pressed a hand to her chest, fighting back the tremor in her voice. I've lived with that name for 7 years, she whispered. Tatiana never even met her father. Do you understand what you stole from us? He nodded, eyes glistening. Every day. You think saying sorry will change that? No, he paused. But it's a start. Loretta's hand trembled as she closed the file. A start for you, maybe. For me, it's just a reminder. The silence that followed was unbearable. He poured 2 glasses of water just to fill it, but she didn't touch hers. You've lost people too, she said finally. You know what it does to you. Yes, he murmured. But I always had someone to blame. This time it's me. He stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the lake, its surface still and mirror-like, reflecting the mountains beyond. I used to think power could erase guilt, he said. Now I see it only hides it. Like fire under glass. Loretta's eyes followed him. So what now? You expect me to forgive you. He turned slowly. No. I expect you to never forgive me. The honesty of it disarmed her. I didn't call you here for absolution, he continued. I called you here because you're the only one who ever told me the truth. And because I don't know how to live with what I've done. She wanted to speak, but couldn't. Words felt too small for the ache between them. Then, a small voice broke the silence. Mommy. Both turned. Tatiana stood in the doorway, teddy bear in one hand, eyes wide with the unfiltered innocence only a child could have. Loretta froze. Sweetheart, what are you doing here? The nice man at the gate said I could come in, Tatiana said shyly. Loretta looked at Tommaso, who nodded. She looked worried waiting in the car. Tatiana walked closer, her little shoes tapping softly on the marble floor. She looked up at Tommaso, her brow furrowing in quiet curiosity. Mommy, she whispered, is he a bad man? The question cut the air like glass. Tommaso's face went pale. He looked away, unable to meet the child's gaze. Loretta knelt beside her daughter, her hands trembling as she brushed Tatiana's curls. She looked up at the man across the room, the one who had ruined her life, and yet now stood before her stripped of all armor, all menace. Her voice came softly, but it carried through the entire villa. He's trying not to be. The words landed like absolution and sentence all at once. Tatiana nodded solemnly, as if that made perfect sense. Then she smiled faintly. Then he's learning. Tommaso turned his face toward them, eyes glassy. For a long moment, no one moved. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was fragile, alive, like the quiet between 2 heartbeats. Loretta rose, taking Tatiana's hand. Come on, baby. Let's go. As they reached the door, she looked back once. Tommaso stood where she'd left him, beside the open file, sunlight painting his silhouette in gold and shadow. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. For the first time in his life, he didn't hide behind power or pride. He stood exposed, human, guilty, but trying. And for the first time, Loretta felt something shift, not forgiveness, not yet, but the faint, uncertain possibility of it. Loretta hadn't expected to hear from him again. A week had passed since Lake Como, yet his voice still echoed in her mind, soft, stripped of arrogance, haunted by the weight of what he'd confessed. When the phone rang early Monday morning, she recognized the number before answering. "Senora Gomez," Tommaso said, his tone careful, deliberate. "There's something I'd like to discuss. Nothing personal. Strictly practical." She hesitated. "You're not exactly known for practical meetings, Becerra." A small laugh. "Then this will be a first. Meet me at the old tram depot, 3 p.m. The line clicked dead before she could refuse. The depot sat abandoned on the outskirts of Milan, its roof half collapsed, graffiti scrawled across rusted panels. Once, it had been the heart of the city's transport system. Now, it was a skeleton of forgotten movement. When Loretta arrived, she found Tommaso already there, standing beside a black SUV, his usual entourage parked discreetly in the distance. He looked different again, simpler, quieter. The sharp edges of the dawn had dulled. "Loretta," he greeted, gesturing toward the cavernous space behind him. "This is what I wanted to show you." Inside, sunlight filtered through broken windows, catching dust motes that danced like ghosts. The vast concrete floor was empty, except for a single table covered with blueprints. Loretta frowned. "What is this?" He stepped closer. "A proposal." She crossed her arms. "For what?" "For you," he said. Then, correcting himself, "For your people." He spread the blueprints open. They showed detailed sketches of a restored workshop, multiple repair bays, classrooms, dormitories, and solar panels across the roof. The header read, "Officine Tatiana, Community Mechanics Program." Her daughter's name in bold letters. Loretta's throat tightened. "You named it after my child?" "It was your idea first," he said. "You said I should fix the world that broke you. I don't know how to fix the world, but maybe I can start with the people it forgot." He handed her a folder. Inside were financial statements, architectural drafts, and a blank section labeled Founder Signature. "I'll fund it anonymously," he continued. "Full construction, first 5 years of operation, staff salaries. You'll run it. Teach. Manage. Whatever you want." Loretta looked down at the folder, her mind spinning. "Why me?" "Because you already started without asking anyone's permission," he said simply. "You built something under that bridge with nothing but scraps and faith. Imagine what you could do with resources." She set the folder on the table, staring at it like a live grenade. "You want redemption," she said. "That's what this is." He didn't deny it. "Maybe. Or maybe I just want to see something beautiful rise where I've only ever built graves." Loretta studied him for a long time. The sun angled through the roof, striping his face with light and shadow, two sides of a man forever divided. "If I agree," she said finally, "it won't be about me. I won't let my name sit beside yours. And it won't be charity. It'll be a movement, for kids who never had a chance." He nodded. "Done." Her eyes narrowed. "And no one finds out it's you." He smiled faintly. "Then I suppose my accountant will have to develop selective amnesia." The following weeks became a blur of collaboration neither of them had expected. Loretta, who had once patched cars under bridges, now sat at long tables with architects and city planners, sketching out the garage school's design. Her ideas came fast: solar-powered lifts, recycled parts labs, open-access repair bays for low-income residents. Tommaso listened more than he spoke, a silent observer in expensive clothes that no longer seemed to fit his world. One afternoon, he caught her scribbling in a notebook beside the half-assembled model of the building. "What's that?" he asked. "Curriculum," she replied without looking up. "Hands-on learning. Every student has to teach someone younger. Keeps the cycle going." He nodded approvingly. "Teaching them to fix more than engines." Exactly. At that moment, Tatiana ran into the room, holding a wrench far too big for her hand. "Look, Mama. I can fix things too." Loretta laughed. "Maybe one day, cara mia." Tommaso smiled softly at the scene. Something about the little girl's joy felt like sunlight breaking through long years of fog. But redemption doesn't come without shadows. Rocco Valley, his second in command, had been watching quietly from the sidelines, and what he saw unsettled him. He found Tommaso alone one evening on the villa's terrace, the blueprints of Officine Tatiana spread across a table. "Boss," Rocco began, his tone respectful but firm. Word spreading. People are asking questions. Tommaso didn't look up. "About what?" "About this project." Rocco gestured to the papers. "They're saying you're losing your edge. That you've gone soft." Tommaso's jaw flexed, but his voice stayed calm. "Let them talk. With all due respect, we built an empire on fear, not charity. Helping street rats isn't good for business." Tommaso finally looked at him. His gaze was cold, steady, and full of something Rocco hadn't seen in years: resolve. "Maybe business needs to change." Rocco hesitated. "You start helping them, you open doors we can't close. People will think you've gone weak." Tommaso stepped closer, the lamplight catching the scar near his temple. "Weak," he repeated softly. "You think it's weak to repair what we broke?" Rocco's silence was answer enough. Tommaso picked up one of the blueprints, folding it neatly. "If they want to call me weak, let them. I've been called worse by better men." Rocco stared at him a long moment, then nodded stiffly and walked away. When he was gone, Tommaso leaned on the balcony railing, staring out at the lake. The reflection of the moon rippled across the water like broken glass. He thought of Loretta, of her defiance, her grace, her refusal to be bought. He thought of her daughter's small voice saying, "He's trying not to be." And for the first time in decades, he allowed himself to believe he might still become something better than the legend people feared. Comment: everyone deserves a chance. If you believe second chances build stronger people. He murmured to himself, echoing Loretta's words from weeks ago. Only heartless ones disagree. He looked up at the stars over Lake Como, his reflection shimmering faintly in the dark water. "For once," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "I want to fix something real." The headlines hit like gunfire. Mafia Don's mistress exposed. Charity or cover-up. Besetta's secret woman revealed. The ghost of Naples falls for a mechanic. By noon, every gossip rag and online tabloid in Italy had plastered Loretta's face across their front pages, her tired eyes frozen mid-blink, Tatiana's small hand barely visible at the edge of a photograph. The photo was cropped to hide the truth. It wasn't a romantic rendezvous. It was a planning session, held in the open, papers spread across the hood of a car. But the captions dripped poison. Il Fantasma's new toy. Tommaso Besetta sat in the marble silence of his Lake Como villa, a newspaper folded before him, the ink smudging his fingertips. Rocco Valli stood by the window, smirking faintly. "You warned me, didn't you?" Tommaso said without looking up. His voice was quiet, deadly calm. "I did, boss. But it's not me you need to convince. It's the world. They think you've lost your mind. Investors have already called. Dubai, Madrid, even Palermo. They're pulling their money. They don't want to be tied to decency." Tommaso's chair scraped against the floor as he stood. "To a man who's trying to fix what he broke." Rocco's smirk faltered. "You think they see it that way? They see weakness. You humanize yourself, and suddenly the wolves think you've lost your bite." Tommaso turned to the window, staring out at the lake. The surface was glass still, his reflection fractured by ripples of wind. "Maybe they're right," he murmured. "Maybe it's time they met the man beneath the ghost." By evening, Loretta's phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Messages, missed calls, a few hateful voicemails from strangers. "Gold digger. Mafia whore. You're finished." She'd changed her SIM card 3 times in 2 days. It didn't help. The internet never slept. Tatiana sat at the small kitchen table coloring quietly. Her teddy bear, stitched, worn, and missing an ear, sat beside her cup of milk. Loretta ran a trembling hand through her hair and stared at the flickering light bulb above. Everything she'd built under the bridge, the teens she taught, the trust she'd earned, was now slipping away like oil on concrete. A knock came at the door. 3 times. Heavy. Familiar. She froze, heart hammering. Then she heard his voice. "Loretta, please." She opened the door slowly. Tommaso stood there, not in his usual tailored armor, but in a simple dark coat, collar turned up against the rain. His eyes looked older than before, as if each betrayal had carved new lines into his soul. "You shouldn't be here," she said, voice low. "Neither should those lies." He stepped inside without waiting for permission. "You didn't deserve that." "I told you this would happen," she whispered. "Your world breaks everything it touches." even when it means well. He looked at her then, not like a man defending himself, but like a man accepting his verdict. Then maybe it's time to burn that world down. The next morning, the press gathered outside Hotel Excelsior in Milan. Reporters jostled like vultures around a podium set up beneath the marble portico. Word had spread that Tommaso Buscetta, the most feared man in Italy's criminal underworld, would address the rumors. No one quite believed it until he actually appeared. Cameras flashed. Questions flew. Is she your mistress? Is the officine Tatiana a front for money laundering? Are you retiring, Don Buscetta? Tommaso stepped up to the microphone. For once, his guards didn't flank him. He looked out at the crowd, dozens of flashing lights, hundreds of curious eyes, and thought of Loretta's hands steadying his car in the street, of Tatiana's teddy bear tied around a burning engine. When he spoke, his voice was raw. You want the truth? He said. Fine. I was guilty. Not of what you think. Of worse. The crowd quieted instantly. I built my empire on silence. On fear. When a factory exploded in Naples years ago, I paid the widows to disappear. One of them was Loretta Gomez. He paused. She didn't disappear. A murmur rippled through the press line. She came back years later, on a street in Milan, when my car failed, and my pride almost did too. She saved my life, my name, and what's left of my conscience. That's the woman you're calling a whore. The word cracked like thunder. I funded her garage. Not to hide her. To help her. Because she's teaching what I never learned. How to build something that lasts without destroying something else. He exhaled, slow and heavy. If that makes me weak, then let the whole world know. I'm tired of being strong. A long silence hung over the crowd. For a heartbeat, even the cameras seemed to stop clicking. Then, as if cued by some invisible force, the crowd erupted, half in applause, half in outrage. Rocco, watching from a nearby car, clenched his jaw. The empire they'd built on intimidation and loyalty was crumbling, and Tommaso was the one swinging the hammer. Later that night, Tommaso sat alone on the villa's balcony. The wind off the lake carried the distant hum of city lights. He poured himself a glass of red wine and didn't drink it. For the first time in his life, there were no calls from investors. No meetings. No deals. Just silence. And in that silence, something unexpected bloomed, peace. He picked up the folded newspaper from the table. The same headline as before, but this time with an update beneath it. Buscetta confesses to past crimes, funds youth garage project. He let out a quiet laugh, half relief, half surrender. The villa door creaked open behind him. Rocco stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. Boss, he said softly. They're saying you've lost control. Tommaso didn't turn around. Maybe I finally have. You'll lose everything. He looked out over the dark water, its surface rippling with starlight. Then I'll still have more than I ever earned. Rocco didn't answer. The door closed softly behind him. Tommaso leaned back, eyes half closed, listening to the night. For the first time in decades, he wasn't haunted by the ghosts of what he'd done. He wasn't running, or hiding, or building walls around his sins. He had spoken the truth, and in doing so, he'd broken free. He smiled faintly to himself, the wind ruffling his hair. For the first time, he murmured, I feel clean. The old shipyard in Naples had once been a graveyard of metal and ghosts, rusted cranes, oil-streaked floors, and forgotten dreams. But today, the air hummed with something entirely new. Music, laughter, the metallic rhythm of wrenches and hope. A banner stretched across the entrance in bright red letters. Officine Tatiana, where broken things learn to run again. Inside, teenagers in grease-smeared overalls worked over dismantled scooters and car engines, the scent of motor oil mixing with sea breeze. Loretta Gomez walked between them, her hair tied back, her hands steady and confident. Remember, she said, crouching beside a boy struggling with a carburetor, machines are like people. They don't fail because they're bad. They fail because someone stopped listening. The boy smiled, trying again. The part clicked neatly into place. Around them, applause from the other students echoed through the vast hall. At the far end, 6-year-old Tatiana handed out toolkits, her little teddy bear tucked into a sling at her side, its missing ear replaced by a bright yellow patch. She took her job seriously, reminding each student, don't lose the 10mm wrench. Mommy says that's the one everyone loses. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Loretta glanced at her daughter, warmth flooding her chest. She looked around the renovated warehouse, painted walls, new lighting, a solar-powered generator humming quietly on the roof. Everything they'd built had been forged from scraps, metal, money, even moments of courage. She didn't see the man watching from across the street. Tommaso Beccetta stood beneath the shadow of an old lamppost, wearing a gray overcoat and dark glasses. The crowd hadn't recognized him. He'd made sure of that. His days of bodyguards and headlines were over. Still, he felt something stir as he watched the place come alive. The same feeling he'd known the day Loretta fixed his Ferrari with a teddy bear ribbon and unshakable faith. That day, he'd discovered the difference between control and creation. Now he saw what she'd built. Not just a garage, but a sanctuary for second chances. The ceremony began with speeches. Local officials praised the anonymous benefactor who'd made Officine Tatiana possible. Loretta stood beside the mayor, hands folded modestly. She never mentioned his name. She never would. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't read from the notes in her hand. She just looked out at the crowd, at the kids, at the parents, at the weary mechanics who'd come to volunteer. This place, she said, was built by people who were told they'd never build anything. Every bolt, every brushstroke, every lesson comes from hands that the world once ignored. You don't have to be rich to fix something. You just have to care enough to start. A murmur of approval moved through the room. Loretta paused, her voice softening. And to the one who believed that even broken people can fix the world, thank you. She didn't need to look at the lamppost to know he was there. But she did. Just once. Their eyes met across the distance. Tommaso didn't smile. He only nodded, his chest tight with a feeling he hadn't known since childhood, something that felt dangerously close to peace. After the applause, the first class officially began. Loretta guided her students through the basics of hybrid engine circuits. Tatiana ran between tables, offering cookies she and her mother had baked that morning. Outside, the sun began to dip over the bay, painting the water gold. Tommaso turned to leave, pulling his coat tighter. Rocco's words still echoed faintly in his memory. Mercy looks like weakness. But as he glanced back one last time, he saw Loretta helping a girl barely older than Tatiana tighten a bolt. The girl's face lit up when she succeeded. That spark of pride, that quiet triumph. It was stronger than any empire he'd ever ruled. Maybe mercy wasn't weakness. Maybe it was the only kind of power that lasted. He walked away slowly, disappearing into the maze of narrow streets, the sound of laughter fading behind him. A decade later, Officine Tatiana became a name known far beyond Naples. Branches opened in Palermo, Turin, and even Casablanca. Each center followed the same creed etched on a brass plaque at the entrance. Fix what others throw away: machines, lives, and hearts. Loretta, older but still steady-handed, appeared on a televised interview one evening. The journalist asked, "You've trained over 10,000 students now. What drives you to keep going?" She smiled faintly. "Because I know what it feels like to be unseen. Someone once showed me that power isn't what you take, it's what you give back." The screen behind her showed a montage of young mechanics working in clean, sunlit workshops. The final image, a bronze statue of a little girl holding a wrench and a teddy bear, stood proudly outside the original Naples location. The inscription read, "Dedicated to Tatiana Gomez and everyone who believed in fixing the impossible." In a quieter part of the city, far from cameras, an older man carried a wooden crate into a dimly lit workshop. He still wore the gray overcoat, though now it hung looser on his shoulders. He placed the crate on the workbench and opened it carefully. Inside lay an engine part, corroded but intact. On the table beside it, a child's drawing sat under a paperweight. A crooked smile, two stick figures holding hands, and the words, "Thank you, Mr. Tom." Tommaso smiled faintly. His hair was silver now, his hands unsteady, but his spirit, for once, was quiet. He began to disassemble the part, humming softly under his breath. In the distance, the faint sound of machinery echoed, young voices laughing, engines roaring back to life. He paused, looking up through the cracked window at the skyline, glowing orange with sunset. "If you believe power should lift, not crush," his voice murmured like an old prayer, "hit subscribe. Because silence and pride have broken enough engines, and enough hearts." He set down the wrench and looked at his reflection in the glass. Not Il Fantasma di Napoli. Just a man who had finally fixed something real. A man forgiven, not by the church, nor the courts, but by a woman who refused to hate him. He turned back to the engine and tightened one last bolt. Outside, a motorcycle started with a perfect purr. He smiled. Some engines run on fire, he whispered. Others on forgiveness.